Okay, so I'm super excited to talk to Nailah Blades today. Um, Hi, Nailah. Welcome on a City Group podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited. This is going to be really good because we know each other from like a group program, so I know we vibe similarly. So that's gonna be really
Yes.
cool. I listen, I whenever I talk to my guests, I'm always kind of like stalking them online. Um, and I really what stood out to me was the like the main theme on your personal website, nailblades.com. Your joy is a revolutionary act. And
Yes,
I would like to start with that. Let's talk about that.
absolutely. And I can talk about this forever, but I really do believe that it all comes back down to our joy. And I think especially for women or those of us who have been socialized as women, we're kind of taught to tamp that down. So, we come into the world and we're like perfect and pure. And then we have all of these layers of BS that are just put upon us. And we start to learn all these ways of being and all these things that we should be doing and all the things that we
Mm.
should not be doing.
Like especially we should bring joy to others. It's
Yes,
like
yes, yes. Exactly. Yeah. And the things that we should be doing. And I think that it really takes us away from our joy. I think it takes us away from who we really are at our core. And I think it takes a lot of work to unlearn a lot of that stuff and to say, okay, what is it that makes me happy? And beyond just being happy, like what actually brings me joy? Like what is that kind of like
mm,
deep, like soul stirring joy that
mm,
comes from me. And I think what you brought up is makes so much sense. Again, for those of us that are women or those of us who are moms, especially, we spend so
mm-hmm.
much time thinking about, okay, well, what do I have to do for these other people, or what should I be doing for other people in order to be a good mom or good sister or good daughter, and all these things, and we totally neglect what we need to be doing for ourselves in order to really bring that joy out. So I
Yeah.
think that just experiencing that joy, just acknowledging it, just saying like this is what brings me joy, and that's what I'm going to do. I think that that in itself is deeply revolutionary because we're just
Mm.
not taught to do that anymore.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And like you said, like not just happy, but like joyful. How do you differentiate between the two? Like what
I
is
think,
happiness to mean? What is joy to you? What do you make a distinction between
yeah,
those two?
I think that like a lot of times when we think about like happiness, and like happiness is great, but it might be kind of those external things that are like, oh, this makes me happy, or I feel
Mm,
happy. And I think that that's the thing that a lot of times people mistake about me. Like I think I am kind of a naturally positive person,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
but it doesn't mean that I'm always happy. And it also does not mean that I don't think that there is
I
a
feel
lot of
this very deeply.
value. Yes, exactly. For those of us that are kind of just naturally bubbly in nature, I'm not always happy. And it also doesn't mean that I'm like discounting those other emotions. I think that is really important to be able to have
Mm,
that full spectrum of emotion.
yes.
And I think that again, as women, we're not afforded that. Like a lot of times we're supposed to be like happy or maybe a little bit of sad, but not too much sad.
No
Because
one
that's
wants you
yeah,
moping around.
exactly,
Mm,
exactly. So I think it's really important that we're
except
able to
maybe the
have
Ben
that
and
like
Jerry's industry. They probably want you moping around.
yeah. But yeah, so I think that it is important to be able to like, have that full spectrum of emotions. But I think when we talk about joy, it's kind of deeper than that. It's kind of that thing that really runs like through you at your core, like the thing that really makes you who you are. And I think
Mm.
and that's what I'm talking about when it's like kind of tapping back into that joy.
Yeah, as you've said, like we're born with it, and we're sort of like everyone is kind of has relearned it. And you said like yourself, you have to relearn, like retrain yourself almost, kind of like, okay, what are some of the BS stories I'm telling myself, and what's kind of keeping me from it? So, like, what was your like unlearning journey, or what were like the cornerstones of that?
Oh
Curious.
my goodness. Yes. So much unlearning. I think that I mean, I think I went through a very common story that a lot of entrepreneurs go through where it's like, got the good grades, got the good job, like left college, had the corporate job, and it was a good job. I had a corporate car and all of this stuff.
Your parents were proud of you.
Yes, very proud. They were very, very proud. And I was like very excited. I was like, I did all the things. I checked all the boxes. This is what I'm supposed
Mm,
to do. And I got in corporate and I was just deeply unhappy. And I was like, what is wrong with me? Right? Because something must be
mm.
wrong with me that I cannot be happy with all of the stuff that I'm supposed to. I
All the
made it,
shiny coins. Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm,
And so I think that is probably where a lot of my unlearning process started, was just
mm,
really digging in and interrogating, like, what's going on that I do not like this, or what don't I like about this, and really being open to some different answers. So kind of had that same journey where eventually I was able to quit my corporate job. I
mm.
got certified as a life and leadership coach way back when in like 2010. Was able to build up my
Before life
business.
coaching was a thing.
Yeah, it's so funny. Before it's funny because I feel like with life coaching, it always feels like, because even back then it was like, oh, everyone's a life coach, and now I'm like, oh my gosh, everyone's a life
And
coach.
their
So
sister and their niece and their grandma is a life coach. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So I think it's just one of those things that when you're in the industry, it feels like everyone else is a life coach. But when you talk to other people who are not like
Mm.
online entrepreneurs, like no one, or a lot of people don't even know what that is. So I think it's just one of those things that's so
What
interesting.
did your
But
parents say?
my parents are funny, or my family situation is interesting because while my parents are immigrants, so I have a very, typical immigrant family where it's like,
Mm.
you get to this country, you work hard,
Yeah, you get the good
and
grades, you get the good
you get the
education.
good grades.
Mm.
Exactly. You do all the things, and that's good. So I was definitely on that path. The interesting thing is I'm also the youngest. So I'm the baby of the family.
Oh, okay. So you had less pressure than probably your elder siblings.
Exactly. So I
Mm.
have always had a little bit more, I've always been a little bit more able to do
Mm.
different
Mm.
things
Mm.
because, thank,
Mm.
bless their hearts. But my sisters, I have two sisters and one older brother, and they really blazed the trail for me in terms of
Mm.
doing like
Yeah.
different things outside of that path, and probably took on
Mm.
a lot more of the brunt than I would have had to. So my parents were definitely
Probably
like,
so. Yeah, that's the curse of the
exactly.
elder siblings.
Exactly, exactly. So I love them for that. But as the baby, my parents were definitely like, "What are you doing?" And honestly, I think sometimes they probably are still like that. Like, what is it
Mm.
that you're
Yeah,
doing?
yeah,
But they were pretty supportive, which was good. Which is lucky. But
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. It's so funny, right? Like it's they're supportive, but at the same time, like I mean, my mom kind of stopped asking me what the heck I'm doing. Like,
yeah,
I mean, I don't know. Even when I studied sociology, like she always explained to people I studied psychology, which is like, well, I mean, probably close enough, but not really. But it's just like,
yeah.
yeah, okay, whatever. Yeah, yeah, you're good. So I don't know, but yeah, um, always like she's doing something with the internet. Fair enough.
Yes,
That makes me sound like I'm
basically.
built like I don't know, I own Google or something.
Exactly, exactly. I know. I was like, I don't think my parents actually know what I do, but they're happy and proud, so that's all that matters.
That's cool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's it's so funny, right? Like, I mean, I work mostly with women, with female identifying entrepreneurs, and you do too, right? You
Yes.
especially work with women of color, and like it's really like I'm still stuck with that joy thing, right? We're so conditioned to bring joy to others, and I mean I get it, right? Like mothering, or like people who mother, and that is like in a very broad term, like that doesn't necessarily have to be your biological children by any means, right? We can
Mm-hmm.
mother like almost anything, but
Yeah.
there is so much about it, right? Like to bring them joy. I mean, I see it when like I don't know, when I see like currently my kiddo, he is very into like those sticker books and the dinosaurs. So last week I saw in a shop, I saw like a dinosaur sticker book, and I was like, oh, he's gonna
Oh,
love that. So I got it for him. And like these little acts, right? Like, and he was like, whoa, completely going nuts about it. And that joy also brings me joy, obviously. But at the same time, yes, your joy should come first.
right. Yeah.
I think
Yes.
that's often gets kind of like it falls to the wayside, right? Because we're so busy doing stuff.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So I think a lot of times when I work with clients, they feel guilty. They feel guilt about even
Mm.
talking about it, even
Like
talking
talking
about like
about their
what brings them
desires
joy.
and what they wish for,
Hmm.
and
Yeah. Or even being like, yeah,
yeah.
we're just focusing on what it is that brings you joy. A lot of times we don't know. So we don't know off
Oh
the bat,
yes. Mm.
which is
That
really
is so
kind
true
of
though. That like
jarring.
I mean, so just so you know, when you listen to this, Nell and I, we share like a mentor, Jessica Ely. And I
Yeah.
remember when Jess actually asked me that, I think 1.5 years ago or something, she's like do something that brings you joy. And I walked her back saying, I have no fucking idea what brings me joy. Fuck
Yeah.
off.
What does that even mean?
Yeah,
Exactly.
like
Yeah.
what? Like just get lost. And then I really was like, shit, like I remember when I was a kid, like I had loads of things who brought me joy. You
Yeah.
know, like the silly innocent things that you like as a kid, who were like completely lighting you up. And then I'm like, yeah, like what is actually like bringing me joy? I was like,
Yeah.
damn, I really had to think about it.
Uh-huh.
That was
It's
like really kind of like a wake up where I'm like, fuck, like how am I supposed to like plan that into my day or whatever, right? Like because I can
yeah,
make
if you
time,
have
but if I don't
no idea.
know, if it's that like obscure concept, like I'm not gonna make time for this because I have no idea what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah. Yes, exactly that. Yeah. So that's what I find is like a lot of times we just don't even know
Mm,
what that is. Or because we've taken on all of these different identities and these roles,
mm,
we put ourselves to the back and it's like, well, I don't even know what I like to do. Like what is joyful for me or what is fun for me. So a lot of times that's kind of the number one thing.
you
And
help your
then once
clients discover like what brings them joy. What is your
Yeah,
secret
I mean,
secret
so
special
one of the things
recipe?
that you nailed that you just talked about is thinking about like what are the things that brought you joy before. So
Mm,
if you think about, whether you're a kid or a teenager or even a young adult or even
mm,
like 5 years ago, what were those things that actually brought you joy? So that's kind of like the first like really easy way to start mining through like
mm,
that. But the other way is to start, and you kind of hit on this a little bit too, as you were talking about getting your son the dinosaur sticker book and you're like that brought me joy to like see the joy on his face about it. And I think sometimes we have to look at those scenarios and say what was it about that made me
mm,
really happy. So
mm.
maybe it is like maybe you get an intense amount of joy from like sharing experiences with other or like
Yes.
giving
Yeah.
to others
I
or
have a very
those
strong
types of things.
nurturing giver tendency. So yes, yes, check, check.
Yeah, exactly. So then it's like, well, how can I cultivate that in my life in other ways where it's not just
Mm,
me going off and buying like a ton of sticker books, but there's
mm,
probably other ways for you to say, like, oh, I could nurture this nurturing side of me. Like, I know that that makes me feel deeply fulfilled. So, how else can I bring that into my life? So, I
mm.
think like those
Yeah.
are the two like big ones that we can look at. It's just like what's worked in the past for you, and then
Mm,
also think about those times when you felt like your very best self. Like when were you like kind of really lit up and you're like, this is who I'm supposed to be, or I feel really good. And then
mm.
thinking about like what was being expressed in that moment.
Yeah. Ooh, yes. When do you feel like your best self?
Oh, so gosh, so many things. I found that I've always known this, but got a really big reminder of it with COVID and the lockdowns. But I am big. I was joking with my husband where I was like, I feel like COVID was really hard for me because all of the things that I like, basically the things that I like to do are like be around people and
Mm,
like go,
mm,
like it doesn't even matter who we are. I just So I really love like being in community with
Mm,
others, and especially
mm.
others who are, like-minded or who are supportive. Like I love that feeling of just
No
whether
one
it's
wants to
like
be in a community of dicks. Like that's no.
exactly, yeah. So it's like whether it's like me one-on-one with somebody or me with like a group of
Yeah.
people, or even being going to like the local coffee shop and like just like
Mm. That
knowing that
was
there's kind
hard.
of
Yeah, the local coffee shop. I feel that too. Yeah, that was hard.
exactly. Yeah. So that's one of the things I love is just being in community with others. I love other things that bring me joy are just like moving, like being outside brings me a lot
Mm.
of joy, and like hiking or like moving around, just kind of like being active, like in a joyful
Mm-hmm.
way, not in that punishing way that sometimes we assign to exercise.
I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, it could there is another way of moving. That's interesting. We should talk
Exactly.
about.
Yes. Yes. So just like moving in a very joyful, natural way brings me a lot of joy. And
Yeah.
and that kind of like when I think about it, I'm like, yeah, when I was a kid, I loved, like running around in like
Mm,
we had like a little field in front of our house that we'd play. And I
mm,
loved that. Or I loved riding my bike. I would ride my bikes for hours.
mm.
Or, in this winter, I would go ice skating. So I'm like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yes.
Like when I was a
Mm.
kid, I loved moving around, but then as you got older, it was like, well, now I'm just moving to like burn like 500 calories or like whatever it was. And I'm
Oh,
like,
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
don't
So you
love
kind of
that.
stop moving aimlessly, right? Like
Yeah,
you sort of need to justify moving time with X amount of calories burned or X amount of number of muscles stretched, worked out, whatever.
yes, yes. And I think
Mm.
that is definitely one of the things that happens to women a lot is that we lose a lot of the things that bring us joy because they don't have a quote unquote purpose. So we're
Oh
only
yeah.
doing things that
This is
have a
so true.
purpose. So, and I remember I read a book and now I can't remember. Oh, it's called Overwhelmed. And it was just talking about
Mm.
like this with women. And they found that like they looked like leisure researchers
Yeah,
looked at
yeah.
like how women like take on leisure or how they play. And they found that like historically women don't do that. Like, so
Yeah.
everything, even like back in the
Women
day, if
don't play. Historically, there is
no,
very
they
little
don't
of
play.
women play. Yeah.
Exactly. Very little play, very little leisure. And all of the things that counted as leisure had some sort of purpose to it. So it was either like, well, I act like I
Mm.
run, but I run because, like,
Yeah, yeah,
whatever, that's
yeah. I ate
exercise
pudding,
and
so
has
I
a
better
purpose.
run. Mm.
Exactly. Or it's
Mm.
like, back in the day, if they had like canning circles. So it's like, yeah, you get
Mm.
together and you can and you gossip and it's a
Mm.
great time. But also that chore had to get done. So it's like
Yeah.
women have always just found a way to like equate fun or
To make the
play or
sucky part less
leisure.
sucky.
Yeah, but it's like I
Correct.
have to do this.
Yeah.
It's productive, but we're not as good at doing stuff just for the hell of it. Just like, well, I just like doing this, and it has
Oh,
no
yes.
purpose. There's
Yes.
not
Oh
like it's
God,
not for the
yes.
kids. It's not for my family. It's not for my community. It's maybe not doing any good for anyone else except for me. We have a lot of
Mm.
trouble with that.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you've hit on some really good points. Like also, yeah, historically, it's not something I don't know when like I mean when you ask me like when was the last time you played? I mean now it's easier because I play with my kid, right?
Yeah.
So, but before I don't
But
know.
but also, I mean, do you
Like
like playing with your kid? I mean, I
some
play with my
games,
kids.
yes. Some games, yes. Some games, no. No.
Exactly. Yeah.
No. No. Not at all. But some games, yes. Like we're getting into the Playmobil stage where I'm like, yes,
Oh,
totally here for Playmobil.
that's so
um,
cute.
but yeah, I was just thinking about like everything has to have a purpose. Like how also how kind of like the boundaries have like how the radius got smaller and smaller for women. Like, for example, I just read the other day, I don't know, it was some bullshit blog post about like I don't know how to survive your first 6 weeks as a new mom or something like that.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, oh, okay, I don't know why I even read it, but I mean, I'm a 3-year old mom, so. But anyway, so I was reading it, and then one entry was like, um focus on self-care, like, and then I mean yes, self-care, check, but the example given was um like shower, like do like
Yeah.
shower every evening and wash your hair, like something like that. And I'm like, that's not actually
Yeah.
self-care. That's called
That's
basic
just,
hygiene.
that's hygiene. Exactly.
That's not the same thing.
Or
Like
like, oh, go grocery shopping by yourself. Like, don't take your kid to go. And it's
yeah,
like, but that's just a
grocery
task
shopping.
that has to get, yeah,
That's
that's not self-care.
yeah,
That's just,
I
that's just
yeah.
something that
Well,
has
I
to
mean,
get done.
yeah, yeah. And then again, I don't get like the shopping a self-care bit anyway. Like I don't know. I I I don't feel really joyful when I'm in a full mall or something. I don't know.
Right.
No, that's just not me. But yeah, like it's so funny how so let's call it society as a general is kind of like reframing all the shitty things you got to do anyway as
Yeah.
self-care. And you're like,
Yep.
no, it's not actually self-care if I go grocery shopping by myself. Where's the
Exactly.
treat in that? Like, oh,
Yeah.
maybe you get a pumpkin latte on your way home. That's the treat.
It's so true. And it's like, no, that's just a task. It has to get done. It's
Mm,
not self-care. Yeah. And I think that that happens a lot. And again, that's just like tying back the like, oh, for women, we just have to be doing these things that like have some sort of purpose. And society frames it that way for us. And then we also internalize that as well.
oh, yeah, well, of course we have, right? Like, I mean, uh, I don't know. I mean, if even when I mean, when I was a little younger, like, it would always kind of like be and still to this day, I mean, and not in a bad way, like not I mean my mom is not meaning like it's not doing this just for spite of it, but whenever there's something wrong with like medical stuff or like the internet or something, she calls me. And when she needs a, I don't know, a picture hanged up or like a light bulb fixed, whatever, she calls my brother. Like it's so intrinsically what we're useful for.
That's so funny.
And yeah, and I mean it was that even when we were kids, right? Like it's so interesting how and then how it got reframed. Like, yeah, no, that's really so kind of like when you think of yourself, like, okay, what are all the tasks that I don't know I'm doing, and I'm kind of like put my own sort of gamification spin on it, but actually I do not want to do this. Get rid of all those.
Yeah,
Right,
no,
like
totally.
yeah, it's crazy. So when you said like the two ones that stuck out when to me, you said like about that kind of like were hard when COVID hit was like a whole community that suddenly went poof. You were like
Yeah.
in your households, like household community, um, and like the whole going outside bit, right? Like, and that also includes travel for a lot of people. But even like,
Yeah.
I mean, some people had like really short or really limited radiuses where they were able to roam about. So
Yes.
that was so I kind of like let's go back to that because I feel in community there's so much interesting things to talk about, right? Like also kind of like what you've said, right? Like where like back in the days when women had to do like what was your example, like canning, when they had to
Oh,
do
like
that and
canning.
like and they were like, oh, let's get like a group of people together and let's
Right.
do that. And that's also kind of like that community of women doing stuff, like doing shitty stuff to get it done. That's no longer the case.
Yeah, I think our communities have completely like we don't have a lot of community. We don't
Mm.
have a lot of natural community.
Mm.
Um and that makes it really difficult. Like I think in order to form community, you really have to go out there and like create these communities in a way that I don't think like our parents or our grandparents had to do. Like they just had more of a natural community. And I think, COVID just like busted that wide open where it was
Mm.
just like, oh no, like you're completely isolated, no more. But yeah, I think you're right. Like we're not even doing those things. I was talking to a friend about this the other day and I was saying, it's great to have friends and to say like, hey, like let's go and do this thing, and we go and we eat dinner or whatever, and we
Mm.
have a great time, and
Mm-hmm.
then we go our separate
Yes.
ways. But something I also miss, which I think I had more of like when I was in college, and especially with my college friends when I still lived in LA, is just we would just hang out. Like we'd just be in each other's lives. So it would be like, oh,
Mm.
I have to go run this errand. I have to go to Costco. And like maybe my friend would come with me and go to
Yeah,
Costco.
just for
Or
yeah, yeah, yes.
yeah, or like they would come over to my house a lot more. So they would just like, or my
Mm.
apartment at the time, but it was
Yeah,
like
yeah.
they would just stop by and it was like, okay, well, I remember me and two of my friends, we went to one of our friends' house and she was like, I just have so much laundry to do. And we just sat and we watched like, I can't even remember what show it was, like Grey's Anatomy. We just watched like binge watched Grey's Anatomy and we talked and we drank wine and we folded her clothes. And like that was like a great afternoon. And I think that that's kind of like missing. I think we've gotten away from that where it's like someone could just
Mm.
show up at your house and they could just kind of hang out or you're just doing life
Mm.
with someone and it's not so much that you have to say
Yes.
like okay on this day we're getting
Yes.
together, we're going to go
Yes.
eat at this restaurant and
Yes.
then leave.
And that day is like 3 months from
Yeah,
today
exactly.
because we're all busy. Yes, I feel
Exactly.
it so deeply. Like, yeah. And I'm wondering if this is kind of like an age thing, like when we're in our 20s, we were all carefree and and like
Yeah.
we just stop by each other's places and fold laundry and like do nothing and I don't know if it's for one thing, surely we have more responsibilities now, we have more things going on, so that factors in surely, but I'm not sure if it's just that or what else it is, if it's some sort of like I don't know, is it kind of like almost kind of like a self shame of like, oh, I don't want to appear like I have nothing better to do, or like there's it's some kind of element because
Yeah.
right, like everyone says like, oh, it takes a village to raise a child, but i I don't know anyone in my like circle who had a village to raise their child. Like
Yeah,
obviously
exactly.
like you had like parent like a set of parents and a set of like in-laws and stuff, but not really like the community thought of like the village.
Right. Yes. I agree. I think there's something that's changed, and I don't know if it's like because we've gotten older, so I don't know if it's an age thing, and maybe 20-year-olds are still doing that, and I hope so. Or I don't know if it's like just for whatever reason, like society changed and like no one's doing that. But I do think I think that you did like this. I think there is something about the shame part because I think even when I think about in my own life, like in order for someone to come to my house
Mm-hmm.
now, my house has to be, I'm like, if you were like, hey, I'm
Mm-hmm.
like around the corner, I would be like, oh my God, like I'd be cleaning stuff, going crazy, like,
Exactly, but that's
making sure that there's
yes,
stuff to
but that's so
eat, like doing all
bizarre,
this
right?
stuff.
Like
Right. And like I don't expect that if I go to someone's house. If I went to someone's house and they have kids and it's like I wouldn't be like, oh my gosh, shame on you. But for some reason
I'd
I've
be
like
like, yes, finally a
internalized
house that looks like mine.
exactly. For some reason I've internalized that shame and I'm like I don't know. I don't know if maybe when I was younger there was less of a requirement that I should have my shit together. Like I was just 20 and I lived in an
Mm,
apartment. So people could
mm,
like stop over or we would like drink before we went out to like,
yeah.
to bars and stuff like that. So I don't know if it's like as you get older, again, it's another one of those shoulds. Like, hey, you're in your 30s, you have kids and like a family, you should be doing like
Yeah,
stuff
yeah,
this
that's
way.
that's a really good part. And even you said like
Yeah.
your first instinct would be like, shit, she's coming over in like the X minus 3 minutes. What can I clean
Yeah.
up in three
Yeah.
minutes?
I'd be going crazy, like cleaning all this stuff. So, I think that there's something to that. And I think it's the same thing as a mom. Like, I think once you become a mom, you enter a whole new, like, arena of things that you could be shamed about. And I think that that
Mm,
makes it very difficult to have a village if you're always thinking about like all of these things that you could potentially be shamed about. So I think that there is
mm,
something about that
mm-hmm.
like shaming of like women. And as we get older and as we take on these new identities, there's just like all new things for you to be ashamed about that you never would have thought about before. And
That is
whether
so
you
true.
like to or
Yes.
not, you know,
I
you're
was
taking
once
that on.
shamed at a playground for feeding my kid, my very active kid, a banana because too much fruit sugar. I was like,
Oh my God, a
what? Like,
banana.
yeah. And like, I mean, he's in no way, like, he's a,
He's
like,
a kid.
yes.
Yeah.
And like, he's like a very athletic kid. Like, he's in no way
Yeah.
overweight or whatever. And he was like running around on the playground and everything. And like, he was 2 at a time. So he was too young to eat nuts, which probably would be like the super healthy protein source. But I cannot feed my 2-year-old
Yeah.
child nuts. So like,
And
he
it's
had a
a
banana.
banana. Like
It's
it's
one
a
banana.
fruit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, thank you for, I don't know. Well, I suppose you're probably shaming me because I look the way I look and I'm feeding my child a banana and has high fruit sugar. But
Yeah.
thank you. Like, wait,
Yeah.
what? Like, yeah.
You're like
So
so
just
so
go.
helpful. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm
Right. Like,
wondering if there's something about that too, like just kind of, I don't know. It feels like now, in order to be in community, you have to like spend money, and it has to be very like
yes.
structured. Like, so it's
Yes.
like,
This is
okay,
so true. This is so true.
yeah,
Like, I mean, this is so true. Like, and I mean, you see this. I mean, this is now kind of like my jam as a sociologist. There is, oh, I forgot which, like, who the author was, but there's a study who links the decrease of community feeling, and kind of like the breaking apart of communities in the US with the availability of free community space.
oh yeah,
Right? Like, I mean, in Europe, um, like, we have a long history, going back to ancient Greece, of the agora, like the market space, right, where you
right.
would go and meet and talk and know what's going on in your village. And even to this day, like, most cities who have, kind of like, um who are older, who have like clearly like a medieval history or origin, they
Mm.
have this market space. And up to this day, you have markets there and you have a lot of parks and they're kind of like all free. So you
Mm-hmm.
still have that. So that, yes, I agree. And it's kind of like how, like, I mean, that's not a thing anymore. But when we think back to when we were like 20, how we would always go hang out at a mall,
Right, yeah,
right? And you would always spend something because it's like the place where you spend, where you buy shit, right? So
yeah.
it was never, and like here, and that was so weird when I was introduced to the hanging out at the mall concept when I was visiting my friend in Canada. Because
Uh-huh.
here that wasn't really that much of a thing.
Uh-huh.
Kind of came later. Like, we were still, I don't know, when we would be like 16, 17, we would still hang out at the park. We would just buy cheap booze and hang out at the park.
Right.
But so yeah, it's really interesting how you brought in like how there is an increasing element of entry fees and payment linked to community.
Right, exactly. Yeah, yeah, and that's so funny that you brought up the mall because that's that's exactly when I was a teenager. You just go to the mall and you did not necessarily buy anything. You maybe bought lunch or a pretzel,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
like you could just like hang out at the mall for hours. And I think that was just like that meeting space for whatever,
Yeah.
for suburban teens. And I think that that's the other I think that's also why like college is so appealing for so many of us because it's like essentially its own little walkable city.
Mm,
You're like everybody's there. There's all types of
mm.
hangouts. You could like it's like has this little town square. Like it's like the perfect little like
The
community.
miniature. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think the more we get away from that, and especially in America, once you start moving out of cities and you start moving more into suburbs, it's impossible to just like
Mm,
bump into somebody. Like I'm never walking, like I have to drive from place to place. And it's
mm,
not like I'm just like walking down, downtown
mm.
or to like the town square and I'm like, oh hey, great seeing you
Yeah,
here. Come come
that's
back to
like
my
the
house,
cross Atlantic divide.
Exactly. So I think that yeah, just the way that everything is made up, it just makes it really difficult to be in community with those around you. I mean, there's
Mm,
even right now my neighborhood's really good because we have a lot of kids and I think the kids kind of
mm.
bring us
Yes,
together.
yes.
But I've lived in communities where I did not know my neighbors at all, like, and we never talked, and you just had no idea who lived across the street from you, and that's just really bizarre and strange. So it feels like we've gotten away from that, like building those like natural communities, and now you really have to go out and find one, or you have to pay to be in one,
Yes.
and you have something. And then we have our digital communities, which are awesome, but I don't think that they should take the place for in-person community. And I think that that's what's happening now. It's like we have
Yes.
amazing
Yes.
digital
Yes. They
communities
should
and
be an
like,
add-on, but not a substitute. And then
yeah,
again, like some of those communities are like have really high entry fees. Like I'm thinking of masterminds and that shit, right? Like
that's
we're like,
true.
oh, sure, yeah, you can hang with us like seven-figure entrepreneurs, but like that's the price tag. And you're like, yeah, no. But yeah, so no, I agree. They should be an add-on, but not a substitute. But this is really interesting. Like, I mean, I just felt like, hey, like yeah, I know my neighbor. Like we say hi when I see them, but at the same time, I'm like, God, I do not want to like talk to my neighbors. I do not want to hang out with my neighbors. Like, I don't know. I don't just from the first impression, I don't know. I don't think they're like my people.
Right.
I don't know. Super judgmental. But yeah, anyway. But at the same time, like it is so bizarre, right? Like because I remember when I was a kid and like my mom would bake a cake and we had no eggs. We would run across the street to our neighbor and like, hey, we need eggs. Got some? They were like, yeah, here. How many do you need? They were just tossing out the
Yeah.
eggs, right? Like, and now I would be like, ew, no, I don't know, where's the nearest shop and how long are they open, right? Like, it's,
Right.
and especially when you think like, okay, eggs is one thing, but right, but I mean, you could spin that thought on and on. Like, for example, think of all like the appliances you have in your house that you only need like once a year. Like, you could really
Oh
do like the
yeah.
whole sharing community, like sharing economy so much more efficiently
Yes.
when you would be actually like, hey, let's get like a neighborhood lawnmower or a neighborhood whatever
Yeah.
vacuumer or like whatever. But
Absolutely. I think about that a lot with snowblowers because we use
oh,
snowblowers here in Utah. And again, our street is pretty good. We're a pretty good like neighborly street. But when we first moved here, I was like, do we need to buy a snowblower? And I like kind of thought about it and I was like looking it up. And then what happened was like our next door neighbor, he just blows like the entire, like he'll just go down the street and like snowblow the whole thing and I'll do all
good
the stuff.
man.
And then there's
Yeah.
another guy across the street that also does the same thing for that side. And I was like, that makes more sense. And exactly what you're saying, where it's like, yeah, there's a lot of things that we could just have more of a sharing economy with. I mean, even like there's a lot of kids on my street
Mm.
and not like they play together, but it's not like any of the moms are like, hey, send all the kids over here and you can go run some errands or something. Like, so it's not like a plan thing. And I think that that would make more sense if it was like, why am I
Yes.
looking for
I don't
babysitters and
know.
all that
The like,
when
yeah.
there's
I mean,
like
are people
seven other
afraid that this?
moms?
Yeah. Are people afraid that this creates some sort of obligation? Like, if you take my
Maybe, I
kids, I
don't
have to
know.
take yours too, or like, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. And I just kind of, I keep going back to that, like kind of fear of judgment and shaming that I think is
It
so
must
like
be right,
built
like
in. Yeah.
because in the end, whatever, like also in life and in business, we most if we don't do something, it's mostly because of some internalized shame
Yeah.
or avoiding the expectations of being shamed.
Right.
Like it always goes back to that, right? That's one of our most primal fears, like
Yeah.
getting shamed. Like
Yeah.
it's not like we're not like at the Scarlet Letter kind of epoch
Right.
anymore, but probably we still are. But it's right, like it's kind of like it's so bizarre. And then the same again, like every like when we talked about like the shared economy, this is now getting very like critique of the system thingy ish, but like we're fighting against like our own like internalized shame and all the stories we've been told and how and I mean regardless to who you talk, they all have these stories, and some have even more layers and layers upon shame. Um,
Mm.
but also the sharing economy and per se the whole idea of community is absolutely is is revolutionary also in itself, to kind of like
Yes.
go back to the start, right? Because it's going deeply against like our capitalistic
Hmm.
system,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you like big corporations don't want people to form unions, which is also like a community. Like
Right.
they want you to buy your own snowblower, not share
Right.
one. They're not making any profits if you share one. They
So
could
true.
sell two if you buy one, right? Like it's also that, like you're not just, you're kind of walking against like this big machine of things,
Yeah.
and shit is exhausting.
It is exhausting. And I think it's interesting because it is kind of going against our own, like humans at our, at our very nature, we're like social creatures. Like we're
Yes.
trying to be in community and help one
Or
another.
at
And
least through all the histories, we have always lived in tribes and communities, and like,
yeah.
and I
And
don't feel we've
I
ever
think a
been so
lot of us,
singled out like
yeah,
now.
yes, exactly. I think so many of us come from cultures that are more collectivist, where we are more like, yeah, like the entire, village gets together and like
Mm,
does the thing, or we take care of one another at least. And it
mm,
does seem like, and especially, I can't speak to like other countries, but especially in America and probably North America, but especially in America, it's very much like, no, you take care of you take care of your tiny family unit, not even an extended family, like your 2.5 kids or whatever,
mm-hmm,
and forget about everyone else. So that means you
mm.
need your own snowblower, that means you need your
Yeah,
own like
obviously,
personal
because
babysitter,
yeah,
yeah. So I think you're right. I think that
that means
by
you only
pushing
care about
against
shit if
that.
it happens in your close family. If it doesn't, you don't care.
Exactly.
Mm,
You don't care. It's not
yeah,
happening. It's not happening
no.
to me. And I can't even fathom what it might feel like for that to happen to someone else. Right. So it's like, I think that it is really like revolutionary to be able to form these communities and form like mutual aid communities, and to figure out like, how can we help each other, and like, how can we do life together? And
Yeah, how we
yeah.
can do life together and like remove any sort of shame and expectations, right?
Hmm.
Like if like do life together means like you're there for like the fun parts, obviously, like the weddings and like all the whatnot celebration things, but you're also there for doing the laundry and
Yep.
like the all like the ordinary things, right? Like it's, I don't know, maybe it's also part of like we always have to show everyone, like because we're so like trained from like social media, we always have to feel like, oh, our life should be a highlight reel, and if we do life with someone,
Yeah.
they kind of get to see that it is not.
They get to see all the stuff. Exactly.
Right, like
Exactly.
I
I mean,
mean, I don't know, I didn't do many highlights this week. Or like what you would call like traditional, or like, I don't know, social media highlights, let's say. I mean, there were highlights for me, but like not
right.
in the sense of like, ooh, glossy glossy shiny shiny.
Yes, it's so true. Yeah, and I'm sure that like you could probably layer the rise of kind of like Instagram and kind of that very shiny social
Yeah, and
media.
everything, like I mean, it's also probably a downside of like individualism, right? Like, and we, I mean, we raise our kids to be independent and individuals, which is good, but at the same time, maybe we also have to take a step back and teach them community,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like that, I mean, otherwise, like how are they gonna learn it, right? I mean,
Yes.
they're not gonna learn that in school, at least I don't know, not here. Not really, right? And if we're not doing it anymore, like as our parents did or our grandparents did it, it would be completely lost once the next generation really like grows into adults.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think it's so true. I think there is like that importance of modeling, yeah, community, or modeling a lot of these virtues that we'd like to exist and persist with our kids.
Yeah. A like okay, this was like really cool. So I think yeah, your joy is a revolutionary act, like 100%, and really community is a revolutionary act. Like I
Yeah,
really feel
absolutely.
those two, yeah, like to really focus more on what brings me joy, and my joy should come first. Kind of like the life vest situation thing, like life vest on first, and then your kids
Uh-huh.
and your husband and whatever. Like, there you go.
So true.
And also a community. How can we build like a community? How can we like unwrap ourselves from shame?
Mm,
And a part of that also is probably like some of us, I mean, I know I'm guilty of this. Sometimes we're still kind of like the gossipy type and like, oh my God, have you seen her? Like her house, like, or her
right.
lawn, it's a mess. And that's also probably what's stopping us, right? Because then we're probably like, oh, okay, maybe someone else is saying this about me too. So I
Saying
should
the
not
same
ever
thing. Yeah.
invite people to my house because my house is even messier. Like, really? Yeah, it's so interesting to really start modeling community to our kids while like raising them as like self-sufficient individuals.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
I love
yeah,
it.
and I think that that ties into the joy thing too. I think
Mm.
like the one thing that often like clicks with some of my clients, if they feel, if they are really resisting against like, you know, this is selfish, or like I don't get why
Mm-hmm.
this is important, is saying kind of like, okay, like if you are able to tap into your joy and you're able to put yourself first, you are modeling that for your kids. So like your kids get to grow up and see a mom who's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, like my mom was really
Yes.
happy, or my mom
Yes,
had these
exactly. I
other
mean,
like
that's
hobbies,
that's
or
what I want my kid to remember. My mom laughed.
yes,
My mom did like silly things with me. My mom
but
jumped out
yeah,
the tower at the pool. Like
exactly.
silly
Or I
things.
always think about like I travel a fair amount, and
Mm.
like so sometimes I'll say, oh, I'm going on a work trip, but sometimes I'll tell my daughter like, oh no, I'm going, like I have friends that live in California, so we're gonna meet up and like uh you know, be with each other, like have a trip with each other, because we never see each other. So I think it's just as important for her to like recognize
Mm.
like, oh, my mom like works and does stuff, but also to recognize like, oh, like sometimes my mom like went
Yeah.
away and like
Yeah, and
did stuff for herself.
she nurtures relationships.
Yeah, and like and myself, and then I could come back
Yeah.
and, you know,
Yeah.
pour all that like love and joy
Yes.
back into them. So
Yeah,
I
I
think
like
that
that.
it's really important to
Yeah.
like model that stuff for whether
Absolutely.
you have
Yes.
kids yourself, or even just
Well, you
modeling it
have to
for
model
the
shit for
greater
yourself too,
community.
right? Like that's the
Yes.
kind of like the fake it till you make it. I That's like shitty Pinterest Pinterest quote, but there's some truth in it, right? Like just model it a couple of
Yes.
days and it sort of starts to sink in
Right.
until you made
Seeing how
it.
like kind of try it on
Yeah,
for size
right.
a
So
little
that's
bit.
kind
Yeah.
of like the thing where the part of everything. Do you want to know what I tell my clients that usually that makes them click that they should be like selfish, quote unquote?
What?
Most of my clients are service providers, so I'm kind of like, if you're a service provider and it's crucial that you provide the service, right? Hence,
Right.
service provider. This means you are your service based business most biggest and most important asset.
Uh-huh.
So if you're not taking care of yourself in any kind, like energetically, financially, emotionally, physically, whatever, you're damaging your asset.
Yeah.
And most people, even like the most like head stuck people are like, whoa.
Uh-huh. I love that. I love that. It's so
Yeah.
true.
Yeah. Right. Like it's so simple. Even like I once had like a client, she had like a business degree and she was really like, whoa. Like this makes so much sense from like a theoretical business point of view, blah blah blah. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. But whatever works for you.
You're like, just go and take care of
just,
yourself,
just
please.
just go and do like whatever brings you joy. God damn it. It's not
Exactly. Yeah. Go
right. It
take a
sounds so
break.
simple, but it's really not that easy.
It isn't. And I think that, yeah, like we are in this kind of society that doesn't make it easy. And I think that's why it can be just like really revolutionary
Yes.
to be able
Yes.
to do these very simple things that, you know, kind of bring us back to ourselves, bring us back to our core.
Yes. And this is what we're on the scenic route all about. Doing like the simple things and
Exactly.
bringing you back to yourself, and that are revolutionary in itself. I love it. Nailah, listen, I always kind of like do an unscripted last question, and that's
Oh.
what book are you currently reading? Mostly because I'm also just really curious. I'm always looking for cool
So
books.
it's so funny. I actually am reading. I'm gonna like pull up my Kindle app because I can never remember titles off the top
Yeah,
of my
yeah.
head.
That's fine. Kindle Lab is, yeah, like I
But
I
I'm
I know
reading
it.
So my fiction book that I'm currently reading, I
Oh,
just started it.
oh, so you have a
So
fiction pile and a non-fiction pile?
I do. So the fiction one
Oh,
I'm reading is The Daughter of Dr. Moreau. So it's
oh,
by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. And I've read a couple other of her books and I've really enjoyed them. So I'm excited about this
oh,
one.
curious.
And
Yeah.
then the nonfiction book I'm reading is interesting, and I just started this one too, but it's called How We Show Up. So it's all about reclaiming family, friendship, and community. And this one's by Mia Birdsong.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, the shoe fits, right? Like,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. I love that. I'm
exactly.
always curious about book recommendations. Okay, I'm gonna add this to my
Yeah.
pile. Yes,
Oh
definitely
yeah.
gonna focus more on community work.
Yeah, and I love reading, so I'm always good for a good book
Yeah,
recommendation.
we should do. Maybe
But
we should do one time to do a reading circle because yeah, like because that would also be like very cool community things. Are
it would
reading
be.
like a reading group still a thing?
I think so, right? And this should be. I think so.
Right?
Because yeah,
Like I mean,
sometimes you read stuff and you just want to talk to somebody about it.
yeah, or just yeah, like in the good or the bad, right? Or just feel
Yeah.
like there's someone else really enjoying this book or really hating
Yes.
this book.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, we should
Exactly.
we should check out if this is yeah, I don't know. Maybe we do the Scenic Route book club or something.
Ooh, I like that.
Right?
I like that a
Because I mean, the
lot.
podcast was my thing of like, I have to find where my people are. I know we're many, but we all suck at marketing, so we have no visibility.
Right.
So I gotta find my people. That's why this podcast is happening. So maybe we do the Scenic Route book club. I have to write this down. Because yeah, that would
I
be
love
fun.
it.
So hey,
I like it.
Nailah, tell us quickly where people can find you online, where you hang out.
Yes, yeah. So you could find me at my website. So that's nailahblades.com. I also have a website for Color Outside. So that's a community. It's a community of women of color who are looking to ignite their joy through outdoor adventure. So that's coloroutside.org. And then best place to find me, honestly, is Instagram. So I'm on Instagram at Nailah Blades, and then the Color Outside Instagram is at We Color Outside.
Perfect. Hey, listen, Nailah, thank you so much for being on for taking a part of the Scenic Route with me. It was a great joy to have you.
Yes, thank you for having me on. This was so much fun.
Thank you so much.